Hi, today I want to tell you three very interesting stories about our favorite mothers-in-law. Thank you for listening to my stories. I really appreciate it. To not miss new stories, subscribe and put likes. Let's go. First story. My wife Dorothy and I have been living together for 3 years. We have a child, and we are both 26 years old. We live a pretty normal life with the usual arguments that most couples have. This story happened about 4 months ago. I woke up after my friend Frank's big wedding, and my head was splitting from the experience the day before. I lay in the quiet of the house for about 20 minutes, then got up and went into the dining room. On the table was a note from Dorothy saying that she and her son had gone to spend the night at her sister Carolyn's house and would be back later. I immediately headed to the refrigerator for a beer to ease my hangover. I opened it and drank it down. As I stepped out of the shower, I saw my mother-in-law Albina standing there. "Albina, what are you doing here?" I asked, ignoring the fact that I was only in a towel. "Didn't Carolyn write you that I was coming to get pears from the orchard?" She replied, clearly trying not to look at my lack of clothes on. I told her I hadn't seen my phone and went to get dressed. A little about Albina: she's 47, an accountant, though she looks younger. Average height, decent figure for her age, shoulder-length blonde hair. But her big brown eyes are a family trait. Her husband, my father-in-law, is in jail for fraud with a long sentence. We help Albina in any way we can, pay the utilities, send packages to her father-in-law in prison. I came out of the bedroom and saw Albina picking pears in buckets despite the sweltering heat. I offered to pick them so she could rest in the house where it was cooler. She insisted on going herself. For the next half hour, I couldn't escape the feeling that Albina was watching me. "Michael." "Paul," she called out. "What's the matter?" I replied. She asked how to turn on the shower in the hall bathroom. I showed her and then went out for a smoke to leave her alone. But I managed to catch a glimpse of her silhouette through the frosted glass. When I returned, I cheerfully said, "Have a nice shower." "So, son-in-law?" she asked quietly. Not understanding, I asked what she meant. "Did you like what you saw?" "Watching me?" she clarified firmly. I stammered that I would never invade her privacy like that. "Besides, you're an attractive woman. It's hard not to admire you," I admitted. She blushed at the compliment. After a pause, she confessed how lonely she was with her husband gone, and that she longed for warmth and affection. "Could you help your mother-in-law for once?" she asked. I was stunned, but immediately agreed to fulfill her request. We kept our passionate meeting a secret. A month later, I heard a knock on the door and was surprised to see Albina standing there with a nervous expression on her face. "I'm sorry to bother you, Michael, but I need your help again," she said. I escorted her inside, concerned. As we sat on the couch, she explained that her car had broken down on the highway a few miles away. A tow truck is on its way, but they said it would take a couple hours. "I didn't know who else to call," she admitted. "Sure. Make yourself comfortable," I replied. I brought her a glass of iced tea while she settled in, clearly still disturbed by the ordeal. We sweetly made small talk about her work, Dorothy, and the baby to distract ourselves. After about 20 minutes, I noticed that she kept fidgeting and biting her nails. "Is everything okay, Albina?" I asked. "You still look very tense." At first she brushed it off, but I realized something else was bothering her. Finally, she sighed and looked up at me. "It's just, the fact that I'm here again brings back memories of the time we were together. I couldn't stop thinking about it for the past month." I felt a shiver run through me at her words. Clearing my throat, I carefully replied, "I admit, I've thought about it a lot too. But Albina, we agreed this was a one-time thing. I love my wife, and you are my mother-in-law." She moved closer and placed her hand tentatively on my knee. "I know we shouldn't, but I've been so lonely, Michael," she pleaded. "Could we spend an hour together while I wait?" My pulse quickened, as she looked at me pleadingly. The spark between us could still be felt, even after weeks apart. Before I could finish the thought, I nodded and eagerly led her into the bedroom, quickly shedding my clothes on the way. Afterward, we lay in each other's arms, flushed and exhausted. Guilt crept into my soul when I thought of Dorothy, who had trusted me unconditionally. Sensing my distress, Albina stroked my face and whispered that no one could ever know. I prayed that she was right, snuggling up to her, and wished very much that she would leave before Dorothy returned so that our secret would not be revealed. Over the next few months, Albina showed up frequently on the pretext that she needed to fix or borrow various things. And each time we inevitably ended up in bed, the passion and longing between us too strong to resist. We stole moments at every opportunity, consumed by our addiction to each other. But one night, our luck ran out. Dorothy came home early from work and found Albina and me frantically dressing upstairs. Too late, we heard the front door open, and my wife groaned in pain as the truth hit her. 2 betrayals of her husband and of her beloved mother. Then followed the painful dissolution of my marriage as Dorothy took our son and moved in with Carolyn, vowing never to speak to me again. My desperate pleas and apologies went unheeded. Albina and I continued our affair for a while longer, but the guilt was too great when I realized I had destroyed Dorothy's life and trust in those closest to her. In the end, I was left alone and outcast in my own family, haunted by a mistake that had cost me everything. To this day, I love Dorothy and would give anything to make up for the pain I caused. But the one thing you can never get back, once it's broken, is trust. And so I live with the consequences of my actions, mourning all that I threw away in a moment of weakness. On that fateful day, my life was divided into a before and an after, and nothing has ever been the same since. Story number 2. I came home today completely tired. There was a lot to do at work. When I opened the door, I realized that my mother-in-law Jane had come to our house. Her voice was coming from the hallway, scolding someone. I walked in, said hello, and realized the reason for her displeasure. Mary's drunken wife was lying on the bed. She was sluggishly snapping at her mother's shouts. I thought wistfully about tonight. Now my mother-in-law would leave, and my cherished half, waking up, would cling to me. Under the influence of wine vapors, she had the worst temper. I went to the kitchen to get something to eat, but I was in for a surprise. My mother-in-law had taken care of it. "Jane, let's have dinner." I invited my mother-in-law to the table. She came in 3 minutes later when I had already finished setting the table. "Your wife is asleep, baby," my mother-in-law said as she entered the kitchen. We ate dinner, and in gratitude for dinner, I poured my mother-in-law 100 grams of French cognac, and then some more, because she liked it so much. While she was washing the dishes, I went to look at my wife. Mary was lying across the bed asleep. Her shirt was pulled up, and in fact, she looked like a wrinkled pillow. I went into the bathroom to take a shower. My mother-in-law was still cleaning the kitchen. After a quick rinse, I came out of the bathroom and immediately ran nose to nose with my mother-in-law. We have a narrow hallway where the bathroom and toilet are located. To be honest, I've always had a soft spot for my mother-in-law. She's always been nice to look at. A rather tall, beautiful woman with long legs, narrow waist. You couldn't even say that she was my wife's mother, but she managed to hide such beauty under shapeless dresses, identical blouses and long skirts, and she also wore some old woman's tights. Despite the fact that my wife and I constantly gave her beautiful things, the only outfit in which I observed her with delight was jeans and a t-shirt when we traveled together to the dacha. My mother-in-law was 43 years old, but she could still give even the younger ones a head start. I had been married for 3 years, but my passion for my wife had not waned, and I often spent time with her. But sometimes, when my wife had those days, and she didn't have time for me, I remembered my mother-in-law. I realized that these were just dreams, and I didn't stand a chance. She was old school and puritanical. but back to the apartment. So, jumping out of the bathroom, I literally nailed my mother-in-law Jane to the wall, not immediately realizing what had happened. Jane had changed into my sleeping wife's robe to make it easier to clean. While she was coming to her senses, something clicked in my head. Perhaps it was the cognac I had drunk. A few seconds passed. I came to my senses, recoiled from her, and quickly went to my room. My thoughts were dashing frantically. I didn't know what to do. I was shaking all over. And then my mother-in-law entered the room and closed the door behind her. At that moment, everything became clear without words. The next morning, I woke up to smells from the kitchen. My mother-in-law was making scrambled eggs. Mary was still asleep. She had been drinking heavily last night, but I wasn't interested. Walking into the kitchen, I smiled silently at my mother-in-law, and she smiled at me. In the morning, I realized that this would not be the last omelet my beloved mother-in-law would make for me. In the weeks that followed, Jane and I began a secret game behind my wife Mary's back. We both knew it was wrong, but we couldn't resist the strong attraction between us. We devised clever ways to find moments to be together without arousing Mary's suspicion. I pretended to stay late at work, and Jane made excuses to slip away from family obligations and hide in the bushes in the neighborhood park with me. It was crazy. The thrill of secret rendezvous fueled our passion. During the secret rendezvous, we were like giddy teenagers breaking the rules, intoxicated with lust and endorphins. Then we quietly returned to our normal lives. Jane, playing the role of the caring mom, me, the dutiful husband. But the excitement of counting down the hours until our next appointment consumed all our thoughts. The reckless pursuit of pleasure left a trail behind us, the distinct smell of perfume on my shirt, the unfamiliar earring under the bed, the inexplicably torn t-shirts. My performance suffered while I dreamed of our next connection. One day, Mary mentioned in passing a mysterious scratch on my back from a particularly heated interaction with Jane on the bookcase in my office the day before. My heart raced with momentary panic, but I quickly came up with the excuse of a box carrying mishap. Jane and I realized we needed to take more precautions. This incident served as a sobering reminder that our risky game could end badly at any moment. But neither of us was ready to extinguish the burning excitement of our encounters that made us feel the thrill of life. Disregarding all arguments of reason, we rushed forward, two moths drawn to a flame that thrills even when it threatens to burn. Story number 2. When I returned from my mother-in-law's, my wife Janet greeted me with a question. "You saw the boys off for a long time." And she looked at me suspiciously. "Did you have another drink with them?" No. The bus left a long time ago." I waved my hand and disappeared into the bathroom. The next day, my wife and I started arranging the furniture, pulling out and putting things away. My mother-in-law Deborah was still on my mind. As I thought back to the circumstances of our incident yesterday, I felt a surge of energy and vigor each time. It still seemed to me that none of this had happened to me. When enough trash and empty boxes had accumulated in the hallway, I volunteered to take them to the dump. After stuffing everything into 2 large bags, I went downstairs, found trash cans around the corner of the house, dumped it all out, and was up the stairs in a couple minutes. At the door to my mother-in-law's house, my feet stopped on their own. Without thinking, I pressed the bell button. Quick footsteps were heard behind the door, and it opened. Deborah's face showed genuine amazement at first, but then it changed to joy. She literally pulled me into the hallway, taking my hand and dragging me along with her. "Come this way quickly," she whispered, pushing me towards the door to the room. "Wait, I'll see what the workers are doing in there." I froze in anticipation, listening to what was being done outside. I didn't have time to think, because Deborah suddenly slipped into the room and closed the door, informing me that the workers were busy. We had some time, and our affair was continuing. The whole time we didn't utter a word. Half an hour later, Deborah walked me out with a sullen smile on her lips. She gave me a hug. "You, son-in-law, come by more often. "Don't be shy," she said. I asked in bewilderment. What about father-in-law Tom? After all, a business trip doesn't last forever. I tried to reconnoiter the situation for the future. "Listen, son-in-law, you for this, do not worry. He has a mistress, and he thinks that I do not know. So he lies to me that he goes away on a business trip, but he lives with her." "Poor thing," I said, stroking her head. "Not so poor now," she smiled, unlocking the door to her room and peering out into the hallway so the staff wouldn't see too much. A minute later, I was in my room. "Where have you been for so long?" I heard my wife Janet's voice, barely crossing the threshold of the apartment. "There is a lot of garbage here. You can take it out. Enough for today. I'm tired." I brushed her off, but I didn't lie. After all, I was tired, and it looked like it was only going to get harder from here on out. But I knew one thing for sure. I was very lucky to have a mother-in-law. Now the important thing was to not get exhausted and to work on two fronts. Over the next few months, I got into an exciting routine, dividing my time between my wife Janet and my mother-in-law. I enjoyed my not-so-good double life, playing the role of the dutiful husband while having a passionate affair a stone's throw away from my wife when she wasn't home. My mother-in-law and I had to be very careful to hide my adventures. We devised a system whereby I would leave a tiny chalk mark on the fence post outside her room if it was clean. Deborah would then send me a message like "pick up milk today," which meant "come on up." We lived for those sweet moments. The risk of being caught kept our physical chemistry explosive. Sometimes Deborah would sneak into my bedroom after Janet left for work and pounce on me under the blanket that still held my wife's scent. On other occasions between business trips, I would rush home during my lunch break to do a quick adult man's work, leaning over the kitchen table with the same unsated cat. By some miracle, Janet remained in the dark as the months passed. Deborah's and I fell deeper and deeper in love behind her back. We both knew it was wrong on so many levels, me cheating on my wife with her own mother. But neither of us could resist. The heart wants what it wants. On the anniversary of my mother-in-law and I's first intimacy in that stuffy room, I surprised her with champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries. In the heat of passion, we got sloppy, knocking over a bottle of perfume on the dresser. The perfume spilled all over the house, and its scent overpowered the small room. Janet came home early from work to change for her date. As she walked past her mom's room, the scent of perfume wafting through the air made her stop warily. My heart stopped when Janet suddenly burst through the unlocked door and found her mother-in-law lying on the unmade bed. A stunned silence filled the room before Janet let out a guttural cry of anger. The expression of pain and betrayal on her face said it all. Deborah's and I rushed to cover ourselves with sheets, and Janet stepped back in horror. "How could you?" exclaimed Janet, whereupon she turned and fled the scene of our attack. I hurried down the stairs, feeling panic and guilt. My mother-in-law sat on the bed in shock, and we both realized that our mistakes had finally manifested themselves in the worst possible way. We hugged each other, sobbing two lovers who had lost themselves in an unstable fantasy world. I spent hours begging Janet through the locked bedroom door, willing to do anything for a second chance. But some betrayals run too deep. Janet showed up the next morning with sunken eyes and a determination to go to the divorce lawyers. She wanted me out of the house immediately. Her mom and I tearfully helped each other pack. We both lost everything that day: my marriage, my relationship with her only daughter, our homes, each other. Sometimes when we give in to temptation, we take the path of destruction. Janet could barely look at me as I said goodbye to her, the life in her eyes dead. I left a home that once held so much hope for the future. Deborah was waiting for me by her car, mascara running down her cheeks. We had nowhere to go. I silently sat in the driver's seat, and she climbed into the passenger seat. I turned on the ignition and the radio to a sad love song, and the hum of the engine echoed the shaking of my shattered world collapsing around me.